Listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 233. Today's podcast is brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hititboard can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by OneTDC.com. Dog agility can be hard on your dog's body. Help keep their joints and muscles healthy with 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a clinically studied blend of unique fatty acid oils that can support your dog's joint health. 1TDC promotes a healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com. Today, we have a very special guest joining us on the podcast, Denise Fenzi of Fenzi Dog Sports Academy, where she is the owner, a longtime dog sports competitor, trainer, instructor, coach. She's done it all. And very much an advocate for healthy dog-handler relationships, is here to talk about changing your agility dog's unwanted behavior. Denise, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Now, for those of you who are new to the podcast, it's been 5 years since we've had Denise on with us. So I think what we're going to do is link back to that podcast, certainly. And the reason I wanted to bring you on here was a great article that you had put out on your blog called, and this was September 4th of this year. So this is 2019. So this is about almost 2 months ago now. And the title of the article was Counterconditioning, Distraction Food, or Distraction Training, ? And this came across my social media feed somewhere, and I read the article. I thought this article is really great and would be very, very helpful, I think, for agility people. It was very helpful to me, personally. So I thought it was a very useful thing, and I wanted to bring you onto the podcast and talk about it. Sarah will also link to this article as well. And so that'll be kind of our starting point here. And let me set this up by saying that as an agility person, I am very concerned about my dog's emotional state now in 2019, much more so than I was in, say, when we started, whatever that was, like 1998 or 9 or whatever year that was. Because then there's many good reasons to be worried about your dog's emotional state, right? There, you can have just any person that you're going to have general affection for, you're generally going to worry about their emotional state, right? There's certainly a moral component to worrying about people's emotional state. Like maybe you don't know this person, they're a stranger to you, but you might still care about their emotional state, right? So there's a moral component, an ethical component there. But there's one other component here that is a little bit specific to agility. If you'll forgive me for pointing it out, it's speed, right? So what I have discovered in 20 years of agility is that there is very often, in my opinion, a very strong correlation between a dog's emotional state and the speed and accuracy in which they can run a course. I found that dogs who were what people might call here in Texas a hot mess, right? Dogs who were distracted or fearful or anxious about something, stressed out about something, often don't run their very best. And you can actually see it as a spectator watching a dog run. But not only that, and we've had dogs that at least started that way, right? But even when you get a good dog, I think most of us, you've been in the sport now for decades or various dog sports, you understand that dogs are different, and each dog brings new challenges, and you also get dogs that are a little more talented or gifted than other dogs that you've had. Even when we've brought on good dogs, we see that when you pay attention to that emotional state, really fast dogs can become even a little bit faster, right? Great dogs can become absolutely elite dogs. And then you can find that when you pay attention to their emotional state, you're getting performances out of these dogs that surpass what they might give you if you weren't paying attention to those things. So that's kind of where I'm starting off here, and that I really, really value, right? Developing an emotional state in my dog that is optimal in its relationship to both me and the sport, if that makes sense. Denise, what do you think about that overall?
I think you're on the right track. And it actually makes me very happy to hear you say that over time, you have found yourself paying more attention to this, because it is an area of concern I've had in the agility world, that the solution to anything that was not going well, the dog is looking at another dog, the dog is looking at a person, anything, was to play. Get out a toy and distract the dog, right? And just don't worry about that because we're having so much fun here. Oh my God, this is so fun. And what I saw happening was the creation of a lot of very hectic dogs. And so what I mean by hectic, I don't know if you use that word in agility, but we sure did in protection. Dogs that are moving a lot, and then we call that drive. But they're moving because they're so freaked out. Now, if you're a really great handler, it's amazing what you can do in spite of the fact that your dog is totally freaked out. The reason they're running fast is because the lion is chasing them. So they are running fast. Mm-hmm. But unless you're an exceptionally good handler, the problem is you can't control it. It's running all right, but it needs to be running with control. So what I see with dogs like that, they may actually, in a really crappy emotional state, they may actually go quite fast, but the odds that they're accurate is not there. The second possibility is if you're not an elite handler, you're not really the top of the line, because the dog can't think and they're just screaming, moving. Unless you are unbelievably good at handling, the dog cannot even begin to guess. Because it's easy. I remember the first time I was in a big competition, I looked at a video afterwards and my hand signals for the dog were outrageous. They were nothing like they should have been because I was nervous. So when you're nervous and you go into a trial, there's a good chance that you're going to have tiny little tweaks in how you handle. When a dog is in a clear state of mind, there's just enough processing left over for the dog to kind of fill in some of those gaps. But if the dog is just screaming and running, I'm running as fast as I can, you're going to lose that. You have no capacity for the dog to maybe help you out just a little bit. The other thing you see is if the dog is stressed and the handler was not good enough at overwhelming the dog's fear, then of course the dog becomes classically fearful, slow, frozen. And that's where you really do see the dog is simply not that fast and maybe leaves, maybe just walks off, right? So in my experience, if you can get a dog, you want the dog high. There's no question about it. You want the dog high and engaged and excited. But the clearer the head, the more the dog is excited because they're going somewhere with you and doing a thing and excited about that activity. Like, for example, when my children were doing running, and if you watch them on the start before the gun shoots, every ounce of their fiber, they're absolutely calm in their head. They're absolutely ready. That's what I want to see in an agility dog. I don't want the kid running fast because the lion's gaining on them. I want them running fast because it's going to happen. And I think to get that absolute concentration and speed while at the same time maintaining some capacity for problem solving when you're not at your best, I really think that does come down to getting the dog in a really safe emotional state. Like, I really cannot see any value to fear. I absolutely see value to excitement, but I see no value to fear. I see no value to aggression. I just don't see how that would benefit an agility dog whatsoever.
Well, I think maybe now's a good time to kind of run the list, Sarah. When we talk about unwanted behaviors in agility, what are some of the things that we're talking about? I think a big one is dogs that kind of check out in the middle of a run and start sniffing the ground, and they won't come back to the handler, or they visit the judge and the ring staff. Right.
And I was just about to point out almost this exact thing that you're teeing up here for me, which is Denise mentioned two very different responses from the dog, right? You have the dog that checks out, sniffs, goes and checks the ring side, wanders off. And then you have the dog that is so high, so amped up that they can't think, that they can't make those small adjustments. And we've said it before, but it's sometimes can be shocking to people that those are really two sides of the same response in a lot of cases. It's a response to stress. It's a response to fear. It's a response to not being comfortable with their surrounding and where they are. And so I think that you get kind of two very different populations, and the handlers may feel like their dog is so different from the flip side of the coin, but often the problem is the same and the solution can be the same.
Absolutely. I often say, people talk about, oh, that dog has so much drive if I could only channel it. Drive always has a focal point. It has to. So drive is not movement. So if a sheepdog is getting ready to work sheep and is not moving, that doesn't mean the dog's not in drive. It means that the appropriate reaction at that moment is not to move. It's really no different than a dog on a start line. The appropriate reaction is not to go out of drive. It's not to move. This is a very common error that novice handlers make, assuming that drive is movement. So as long as the dog is moving, they assume comfort and desire. And that's not true. Movement can come from the temperament of the dog. Some dogs just move under stress. Movement can also come from the way the handler has handled the dog's distress in the past. So if your dog looked at something because they were afraid and you did some combination of pulling their hair, pinching their butt, getting really excited, hitting them with a toy, oh, this is so fun, that will create a dog that gives the appearance of drive because it's moving. But movement is only useful if it has a focal point. Otherwise, the dog will move in a direction that you don't like. So that's useless to you. A dog that simply zooms around the ring is not in drive. He's just zooming around the ring. And then other people, whether on purpose or not, cause the dog to stress down. Again, it could be the temperament of the dog. Some dogs temperamentally will stop moving, just maybe who they are. Others will do that because the handler, when the dog was stressed, they went catatonic. I see this a lot. The handler stands there, doesn't know what to do. The dog looks at the handler and says, you are not very useful. You haven't got a clue, so I will take care of myself. That is more likely to cause that sort of dropping down in energy, walking away from the handler. So it's genetic, right? It's temperament, it's training, it's all of these things. But no matter how it goes or what it looks like, it's not helpful. At the end of the day, none of these things is going to get you where you want to go, whatever your goal is. I can't imagine anyone wants to run with a dog who doesn't want to be there. And stress isn't how you slow the dog down, right? So there's a lot to it. It's actually a really interesting topic.
Yeah, well, you had said something interesting right at the beginning in that over your years of observing the sport of agility, that people have been using a lot of just straight up distraction. And when I think back on my 20 years, I think that's certainly the case. That was definitely the path for success for many people, myself included. It's the majority of what is taught. And let me give some very concrete examples to agility people out there so you can kind of follow along here. We had a Rottweiler, right? Our first agility dog was a Rottweiler. She was a great dog. She did phenomenal things in agility. But when she started, and actually I would say throughout the duration of her life, right? This is a Rottweiler. She would alert to things, okay? Things that looked out of the ordinary. Now, you mentioned genetics, and I think we have some of that here. So if there were say a guy walking into the training facility carrying a baby on or a small child on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. It's a very odd look and appearance. And she would stop working. She might be in the middle of the sequence or something or on an obstacle, look, and then start bluffing, the and then let out the alarm barks. We'd take her to big events like the AKC Invitational, which I think at that time was in Long Beach, California. And so we would have situations where back then it was on Animal Planet. So now you have these cameras and these cameramen, which are walking around. They look like cameras that walk. You can't see the head of the camera person.
I was just thinking, like in today's day and age, like the cameras are like tiny and next to the obstacles, and the cameramen are outside the ring with like these high-end cameras. And this is 15 years ago, and it was a big camera and a guy holding it.
Right. So we're aware that there's a relationship between emotional state and performance, right? So we know, okay, she's fearful or anxious about this thing, weird thing she's never seen before, we don't really have the opportunity to go to the guy, give him treats, and have her meet and sniff all the equipment and all this stuff, things that you would normally do. And so, what are you going to do? Well, for us, it was loading up her kibble, her dry food in a bowl, and having Sarah would be my assistant, right? I'd be about to run the dog in at the start line. We're there and you're rattling the bowl of food in front of her, trying to do what, right? Basically, we're trying to distract. Don't look over there.
Right.
Remain focused on this food. See this bowl. It's going to be waiting for you at the finish line. Here, have a piece or two of kibble, and please try not to let that thing over there bother you. Right. And that was our attempt at trying to deal with the emotions that she was having. And you can see that it's not really a way. It's not a very, well, I don't want to say it's not effective, because distractions, why do people do it? Why did we do it? Because to a large extent, they worked at least somewhat. Right?
I think
they worked a little bit.
Yeah,
it absolutely works. So what I would say is, if you're going to use a scale of 1 to 10, if the dog's fear is at a 1 or a 2 or even a 3, it can work very well, because what happens is the dog isn't that fearful anyway. They're aware. So what you did is basically a little bit of desensitization. The dog ran. The dog enjoys running. The fearful thing was there. You probably lost a little edge. The dog wasn't really that afraid. Nothing bad happened. And the dog got their food. So at the end of the day, if it comes up again, the dog may well have improved their behavior. So that's why people did it, because it can absolutely work. The same as handing food to people when your dog is afraid of people. Kind of the modern thinking is that's just not a very good idea, because what you're doing is handing the food to the dog when they're in their maximum fear. You're drawing them towards the person they're afraid of. So when the dog is most afraid and snatching the food and then running away, there's all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of reasons why you don't want to do that. But it doesn't change the fact that it worked great for many dogs that had just, let's call it mild discomfort rather than fear. Mild discomfort about the unknown works fine, because now the dog has taken something in their little brain. They're saying, I see a thing. I don't know how I feel about it. The way that looks to you on the outside is discomfort, but it's not really fear. It's just unsureness. And now you pair that thing that I don't know with a cookie, and the dog says, well, now I have gone from not knowing how I feel to feeling okay to maybe feeling good. The problem comes in when the fear scale is above a 3, because now you have a dog. You showed the dog the kibble on the start line. The cameraman is still there. The dog is not convinced. The dog is looking back and forth between the cameraman and you. The environment, the stress of the environment, the noise, the excitement. Now the dog's arousal level's going up, but the fear is still present. Now you start running. Now movement adds to the dynamic, because a moving dog sees things differently than a stationary dog. So now halfway through the run, how fearful is your dog? It could be getting worse and worse and worse. Now your dog just goes berserk on you. That could mean going after the cameraman. Happens all the time. You see it. How often do you see a dog go running up to the judge? They don't necessarily do it off the start line. They do it halfway through the run, because all of that energy is building and the dog is getting more and more agitated. And on this occasion, the dog's fear was greater than, let's say, a 3. And once it hits a certain level and the owner is yelling cues, and the owner starts to panic because they see it coming. And so you get that cycle, and then the dog loses it. And so it really does matter when people talk to me about how would you handle this problem. It really does matter. If it's very mild, there's a good chance that 95% of people can solve it just because everything works, especially typical dogs. I talk about typical dogs and atypical dogs. I need to write a blog on this topic. The typical dog, you could do really terrible training. It just works,
Right.
Dogs are amazing. They just figure things out for us. Thank God, because it gets us through a lot. The problem is when the dog's behavior or distress goes over that mild category. Now you need to start using some kind of thinking and reason. And then you have the dogs that are up on the 9-10 of the behavior scale. And now it takes a lot more than some thinking. Now it takes sophistication, very good skills of observation, potentially medication. Just like with people, we have sadness and we have depression. Those are not the same. And so recognizing, is your dog a little sad? Can you change that? Or is your dog depressed? So all of those come into play in the behavior scale. So when people talk to me about distraction, I'm like, oh, what the hell? Give it a shot, right? Your dog's issue's mild and you don't know, maybe you don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're a novice handler. if I can do my little 5-minute speech, because that's how much time I have with you, that's what I'm going to suggest. If you start talking to me about more middle range and I have 5 minutes with you, I'm going to say, I think you need to get hooked up with a trainer. And if you talk to me and your dog is clearly completely losing their brain, then I'm going to say, I think you need to talk to a vet, because I only have 5 minutes with you, right? And I'm not going to be your trainer. But in the blog, when I talked about masking behaviors and distraction and counterconditioning and desensitization, the thing people need to understand is that they're not one and the same. And that was what caused me to write the blog. And really, it's a pretty big red flag when someone says, I've been working on this for years. Because frankly, if you've been working on it for years, if you just stopped and thought about what just came out of your mouth, it's not working. It's not working. Whatever you're doing, you're either doing it wrong or it's not going to work for your dog or your situation. There's all kinds of possibilities. But the first step is knowing the difference. Knowing, are you distracting the dog? Are you counter-conditioning or something else? Are you training? These are all great, wonderful things. They all have a place, but you have to know which one it is, because if you don't, then you can't change direction.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was exactly one of the points that I was going to make, is that there is a place for all of these. And I know that some people's reaction to getting into, I guess, what I would call the nitty-gritty of training theory is, I don't necessarily need to know all of the academic reasons or the theory behind what I'm doing. But just like with handling theory, if you don't understand the theory, then you're not as good at applying it correctly or applying it at the right times or applying it for the right thing. And so I think that there is very much a parallel here in thinking between handling and making your behavior plan. And that's, you can't do a very good front cross if you don't have a really clear idea of when a front cross works really well and when it doesn't work really well. Mm-hmm. And it's the exact same thing here. You can't have effective distraction training or counter conditioning if you aren't familiar with what situations lend themselves to one versus the other.
Yeah, well, let me break in here. And I love everything that we're talking about. And one thing I want to do is make it very clear, for people who find it tough to distinguish between all the different things. Like just looking at the title, right, of Denise, your article, counter conditioning, distraction food, or distraction training. And my first question is going to be, okay, whatever counter conditioning is, that seems like a distinct entity, different from this other thing. But look, distraction food and or distraction training, what's the difference there? And I'll give you my first attempt at understanding the distinctions that were being made here. So let's say that I have this dog and it's the Rottweiler, and she's had some interaction previously with cameramen, and it distracted her and it made her run not as good. So I say, okay, in the future I'm gonna be on the lookout for it. Aha, we're here. I see a cameraman again. I'm gonna do everything I can to not let her see that cameraman. To me, that's true distraction in the sense that it's most optimal. My dog will never enter the emotional state if they don't even notice that person is there, right? It's like if you have a best friend, or if you have a friend and they had a really bad breakup and you see their ex across the street and you're like, hey, look over here real quick. I got to show you something on my phone. It's a hilarious picture. And then their ex walks by, the danger has passed, and then you go back to normal. That's the ultimate distraction training. Now, I know a lot of people out there do that, because I remember walking around with that said Rottweiler at various big competitions, and many a border collie handler would see us coming and suddenly change directions, right? Or shield their dog's eyes physically, like cover their half of their face as they and speed up and hurriedly walk by. Right?
And that's brilliant, though, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, it's exactly the right thing to do when your friend walks by their old boyfriend. Why would you traumatize them? But what if 5 years had gone by? After 5 years, that person is probably in an emotional, what one hopes, in an emotional place to see their boyfriend and deal. So you look at the situation and you ask yourself, right now, today, what is the right answer? Look, if I'm about to go in the ring in 30 seconds, I don't feel like having a training session. I want to have a good run. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to distract my dog. So that is a fantastic definition of ultimate distraction food. I love that.
Right. Okay. And then, and I love the follow up there. But like you said, is this ultimately kind of what we desire? Because in agility, we run into situations where we can't shield our dog from said thing. Maybe you can shield your border collie from my Rottweiler, okay? But can you shield it from the judge, right? Can you shield it from, say, thunder? So this is going to take me to my next example. So I had a great little border collie named Rook, and at some point in her life, she became thunderphobic. Like, I don't know, middle age, like 4 or 5, something like that. And it was extreme. Like, this is a highly trained dog, you know, great recall, all that stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But during a thunderstorm, it was like you couldn't talk to her. You couldn't take her out to the bathroom, right? She wouldn't come back. She would try to run away. Like, it was very, you can see that thunderstorms were really a terrible thing for her. And, you know, I don't enjoy thunderstorms as a human, right? I have to act braver than I really feel around because now I have children, right? And when they were little, they didn't like it. My daughter still doesn't like it. And, you know, so I have to put on a brave face, but I don't like thunderstorms either. But it's just easier for me to, I guess, understand where the dog is coming from. And so she is very thunderphobic. And one time we were at an outdoor ring, local trial here, outdoor dirt arena, you know, open walls arena. There are no walls, but there's a roof, right? So when it rains, it makes this horrible loud noise on a tin roof.
Right.
But there's this tremendous thunder. So once the thunder rolled in, I'm like, I walk over to the crate. She's a basket case, right? She's in the back of the crate. Her ears are all whacked. Like, she's, being affected very negatively. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to run her. It's not even worth it. Like, what are we even doing here? And then I thought, this is like one time I did it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get her out and play with her and just see what happens. Okay. Because one thing that I do with all of our dogs, I have a 9-month-old poodle. I'm working on this with her right now is we use tugging as a reward and generally as their big reward if we can. Like, even with food-driven dogs like the Rottweiler, later in life, we were able to introduce tugging once we kind of figured out how to teach it, what it meant, how to do things with it. Because it's just so handy and useful in agility. And she was a great tugger, tremendous tugger, like could tug, like we proved to a very, very high level. So when we prove, we introduce distractions in training, right? We'll have multiple people standing around. Then we'll have other dogs playing around her while she has to tug. These dogs can tug with puppies trying to interact with them and kind of jumping on them a little bit, with people clapping, with dropping objects, noises, out in the rain, in the mud, in the grass, indoors, in a variety of situations we're tugging with these dogs. We introduce these distractions quite deliberately into the training. And so what I've found was when I gave her the green light, the cue to tug, she did it. And to me, it felt almost like she couldn't help herself. Like she had to tug because it had been trained into her so much. But you could still see from her body language and ears that she was very aware of the thunder, right? And I did I think a start line or something at the warm-up jump, and she could do it. Like she could jump, do the start line, all that. So long story short, I did the run. She ran great, like her usual self, right? And gets on the toy and the leash and everything at the end. She wins that run. She was very good at that time. And then, I put her away and I was like, okay, that was interesting. I don't know that I'm ever going to do that again, but it was something that she could do to me in one of her worst, most fearful states. So there, I'm not using the tugging as distraction in the same way that you would shield your dog's eyes, because she is aware of the thunder the entire time. She is experiencing the bad emotions. There was no shielding her emotionally from the thing that she didn't like.
But you were asking her to do something.
Right, but she was able to do that. Now,
well, there's a few things going on there. So first of all, if the thunder happened first and then you took her out and then you played, depending on the timing, you could actually have classic counterconditioning going on because thunder predicts toy. Now, that probably didn't happen because the thunder was probably going on for a period of time, so it would have been a little bit random. You also have a border collie, which some dogs have what basically OCD, right? They're compelled to work or to play under certain circumstances. I tend to think more about Belgians when I think about compelled to play tug. But pretty much if the tug shows up and they have to go through fire, it's not like they choose. They don't make rational choices about what they're going to do. They simply do it. So did it work? So there's some things that this is such an interesting example because normally that would not work. And the reason it would normally not work is because the fear you described was way above 3, right? It was extreme. So for most dogs, that would not be effective, but it was effective. Now, the next thing I would be very curious about is if you went back to that same environment and did the same thing again the next week and then the third week. Now, around the third week is when the dog won't walk in the door. And that's when things get very interesting. It's not in the moment. Yes, it did work in the moment, but did it work? Or did it create long-term associations where the dog started going, wait a second. If it starts to thunder, he's going to have me come out and play tug. I'm going to play tug and I'm going to poison the tug because now the dog is like, I'm doing this thing that I used to like. Why am I doing this thing? Wait, I'm not having fun. But they don't necessarily figure that out day 1. Day 2, they do it again because you asked. Day 3, they don't walk in the door.
This reminds me of peanut butter and pills for people who give their dogs medications through peanut butter. And then as soon as you reach for the peanut butter jar, they're like, 100% of the time you bring out peanut butter, I'm getting a pill shoved down my throat. So I'm not coming to you for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, the example I use for counter conditioning, when I walk my dog off leash, I always leash my dog when a person or an equestrian comes towards me on the trail because I think that's polite. My dog isn't going to do anything, but you don't know that and you're on a horse, right? So just always walking along, I see the horse, I call my dog to me and I leash them. What started to happen, I found this fascinating. As soon as I would call my dog, they would look around to see why. They came, it was no problem. And I could put the leash on. But the act of putting the leash on my dog caused my dog to look to see why I did it. So that's a classic example of conditioning. Now, it didn't have an emotional component, but it could have. What if my dog was afraid of horses or aggressive towards horses? What starts to happen as soon as you call your dog and put the leash on? What emotion does your dog start to experience? Aggression, fear, maybe before the thing even shows up, but they know it's coming. And all of my dogs, I've noticed over time, every single one of my dogs has this reaction when I leash them in a public space because I never do it. Now, it would have been easy. I misspoke. In the places where I take my dogs for walks, they are off leash. The only time I leash them is because I feel that's necessary. And as a result, they make the connection. All of them make it very fast. If I wanted to prevent that from happening, I could just randomly leash my dog on and off, so that sometimes something predicted, other times it didn't, but I don't care. It's because my dogs don't have an issue. But I thought it was a great example of what counter conditioning should look like. So if my dog looked at the horse and I did have fear, it has to be look at the horse, cookie follows. Look at the horse, cookie follows. It's the same as the leash goes on, you see the horse. What is the association? The leash has to predict the horse. If I want the horse to predict cookies, it has to be the horse to the cookie. It's an important thing because I think that's where so many people go wrong with counter conditioning. They do it the other way around. They see the horse, they get out a cookie, the dog sees the horse. So now what happens is cookies predict horses. Horses don't predict cookies. So even if you see it first, you must make sure the dog sees the thing first and then gets the thing you want. Right? Does that make sense?
And it's such a huge difference between the way you do distraction, where you don't want the dog to see it at all.
Right.
And counter conditioning, when we're trying to change the emotional state, the value that the dog has for this thing, right? It's completely different. It's a very small, subtle distinction, but it is 1,000 times, 1,000% important.
It's everything.
Understand it. Go ahead, Sarah.
And if your dog, if you get the order wrong, you can end up poisoning the food. So what happens is the dog starts going, oh man, that thing is, I'm going to end up, the food showed up, therefore something bad is out there. Right. So imagine if every time you tugged with your dog, thunder followed.
Right.
How long before you showed your dog a tug and your dog said, no, thank you. I think I'll go back in my crate now.
Right.
Difference between the thunder predicting the tug and the tug predicting the thunder. So right there, if people have been saying, yeah, that's me for years, I have been having my dog look at the judge and give cookies. And for years, there's been no change. The first thing I would want you to ask yourself is, are you sure that was the order? Because if you started to tense up when you saw the judge and you started reaching in your pocket for the cookie and the dog goes, uh-oh, and now looks around, you've actually done the opposite. All you've really done is poison the food and you've done nothing about your judge. That's the biggest error. The second one is the issue of over threshold. So the food, the dog likes the food enough. Let's say your dog likes food at a 9, just like your dog liked to tug at a 9. Let's say the thunder was an 8. The problem is 8 is way too high to be working on a dog's upset. But if the food is powerful enough or the tug is powerful enough, the dog will take it anyway. And that is masking your issue. And as a result of masking your issue, because look, he's eating, the judge is right there, 2 feet away, he's eating. Well, yes, because the food's important. The question becomes, what happens when the food's not there? It's not, unless you're now running agility with cookies in your pocket, it does not help you if the dog's behavior is being masked, if the underlying emotion is not being affected. All you're doing is delaying your inevitable day when it all goes to hell. Because when you go in the ring, the judge is there and the cookies are not. And your dog's going to go, well, then, you know what? I have to bark at that guy. You know what I really do like a lot for situations like that, agility type stuff, when the dog is afraid of a very specific thing like the judge, I really do like Leslie McDevitt's look at that. And the reason I like it, the dog looks at the thing, but instead of getting sucked in, because the worst thing I think you can do with a dog who's got fear issues is let them stare. Nothing good comes from staring, right? So the dog looks, the ears go up. That tells me right there. That's a great time to mark that behavior. Click if you click, or just say yes, whatever you do. Turn the dog away from the thing. Give the dog a cookie. Let the dog look back. For specific hard fears like that, I really do like that game a lot. And then the dog starts to work it. The dog looks at a thing and goes, ooh, I'm going to play that game where I'm going to look at the thing and look back, look at the thing. For more generic fears, I really prefer a more desensitization kind of a thing, more Amy Cook's play way. So the dog has, you go outside the dog park 100 yards away because your dog has a basic generic fear of running dogs, and you just sit there and play with your dog. I love that because there's no food. Because if you start feeding your dog, yeah, I know, the dog will sit there eating and will pay no attention to the thing. He'll pretend like it doesn't exist. Play is a low enough value reinforcer that I don't find it masks behavior almost ever. So it's safe. It's a very safe and effective way to get there when you can set the situations up, because this is a big deal too. So much of behavior really cannot be set up easily unless you have a cadre of people available to conveniently pop in and out from behind the A-frame. When I was a professional trainer and doing private lessons, I had no idea what an enormous advantage I had over my friends. Because after a lesson, I would just say, hey, my puppy's having this issue. Can you help me out? I had this constant flow of new people who were more than willing to give me a hand. As soon as I stopped having private lessons, so I teach online. I don't have private lessons. It is so much harder to set things up because I don't have this endless supply of dogs and people who are willing to help me out. Now I have to start balancing it out. Is this an experience where I can just go somewhere, like outside the dog park, and spend an hour reading a book while I scratch my dog on the head? Or is this a situation where it's going to be very hard for me to make that happen? That does affect how I address things. Because in the one case, look at that. If I am startled, I can still use it. So somebody popped out. I didn't expect them. I can tell my dog, look at that. Mark it, reinforce, moving away until I can get far enough back that maybe I can make better use of my time with that situation. But all of these options, if you have an issue and you're not getting through it the simple way, like you just described with the kibble and just saying, isn't this delicious? And your dog says, I changed my mind. I love that person. If that's not working for you, you should explore all of the options. There are so many out there. You should know all of the options for dealing with fearful behavior, aggressive behavior, reactive, and you should be willing to evaluate your progress. And if you are not making progress, you need to change what you're doing or you need to change the approach you're using, because either you're doing it wrong, and obviously you don't know that, because if you knew it, you would have done it right. So you think you're doing it wrong, you're wrong. You think you're doing it right and you're wrong. Or it's not the right answer for either your dog or your specific situation. And that willingness to change direction, and I don't mean every day, but look, if you're making a difference after a month or two, you should be making a difference. If you're not making a difference, stop trying to pound that peg into that square hole, right? It's not working for you. And a little evaluation goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we have a real advantage as instructors because we're exposed to so many different people, dogs, dog problems, and it really it does make you a better trainer because every situation is unique. And I love that you keep making the points that I want to make sure that we make. I was going to say the exact same thing. There's so many different strategies, and they each have their place. And that's one of the reasons that we love having this podcast is to really kind of bring lots of different areas to people and expose them to it. That look at that game. I hadn't even specifically called it that, but we used that with these 2 new puppies when we took them to the playground and they didn't like a lot of the movement. And it didn't take but, one session before they are doing exactly what you said. They are very pointedly looking at the thing and looking at me like I did it. I looked at it, where's my treat?
Absolutely.
And the whole demeanor of the dog is different. You take a dog that maybe went to the park 2 times and never could relax and then start doing this work. And within a session, she's rolled over on her hip, which, when I view my dog, that's a very relaxed posture. She's just sitting there and totally fine with everything. And I think it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Also, I do think we need to bring up the issue of raising criteria. Mm-hmm. So if you brought your dog to the park and you worked, look at that, and after 2 sessions it worked, then ask yourself on the 3rd session why you're still working. Look at that on the same circumstances with the same dog. Now you're causing other problems for yourself. So what would be raising criteria? Well, maybe instead of just looking at you, your dog has to do something for you.
Right.
Offer something. Maybe your dog has to do it when the distraction comes towards you. But if you stay at the same level, you're going nowhere. You're not going to progress your dog sport goals. So even in behavior, I expect my dog to put out effort. If I am rewarding you for being brave, then you need to be brave. Show me some bravery, right? You're not being brave if you're doing the same thing over and over. My personal belief is that we've gotten a little carried away with food in general. So I recognize that I have a different perspective on this than many of my other people that I associate with that I respect very much. I just think it's gotten to the point where people don't think a dog can get through the day without their pockets stuffed with food. And I think that is disrespectful of what it is to be an animal who has autonomy. I really don't believe we have to train the dog can't walk through a doorway without a cookie. Seriously? You really don't think that before people ran around with food in their pockets, dog managed to walk through doorways without cookies? Really? I think that's disrespectful. Dogs have way more capacity, and I really believe all animals, human animals, dog animals, want to be brave and want to be able to do more. So let them raise criteria. Ask for something. I ask people, what was that cookie for? It's one of my preferred phases. I love that phrase, and my students hate it because what I'm doing is I'm saying, you can use all the food you want. I don't care, but you need to have a reason. If you're just feeding your dog because you have a problem, you, the human, are afraid not to feed your dog, then you have a problem, but it's not the one you think you have. So when you're feeding your dog, you should have a reason. And that includes raising criteria, asking more. And if you're asking more and it's not reasonable, then back it up. That's fine. But like personally, when I socialize, my preference is not to use food in socialization because I think it distracts the dog from what they're supposed to be doing, which is learning about the world. I think that's an error, which doesn't mean I don't bring food. I absolutely bring food because sometimes things happen. Life happens, and I didn't expect it. So some random dog lunged at my dog. I didn't see that coming. I have an 8-week-old puppy. You bet I'm going to get out the food. Because what happens after you get lunged out? How convenient. Food happens after. Mm-hmm. But why did I use the cookie? So when somebody says to me, what was that cookie for? That cookie was a consolation prize for getting lunged at. I want my dog to say, Lunging dogs predicts cookies. But if I feed the dog 1,800 cookies on that half-hour walk, then how can the dog possibly make that connection? Because they've had so much free food for no reason whatsoever, except that I have a problem. They can't get the effect out of the cookie, just like I like ice cream fine. But if all day long, I go every minute, another bite, do I really care anymore? So I'd love to see the use of food in a somewhat more strategic manner. And I want people to be thinking in terms of raising criteria and asking themselves what they're trying to accomplish with their training. The same for behavior as when you go out and do agility. I am sure you have lazy days when you go out and you just mess around for 15 minutes. It's fine, right? Your dog got some exercise, you got some exercise, you accomplished nothing, but that's okay. You had a good time. It's okay. But when you want to teach something, you want to teach weeds, you want to teach a certain pattern, then you went out with a strategy and you had a reason for everything you did. You might change direction. The thing you do might not be what you thought you were going to do because maybe the last repetition told you went the wrong direction, but you have a plan. Behavior has to be the same way. You shouldn't be feeding mindlessly. You should know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that is what will allow you to evaluate your choices and make better choices when you go forward.
Yeah, I really like that. And especially for newcomers to the podcast or you've only been listening maybe for a year or so, you're still going through all these back episodes. I think one thing that Sarah and I like to point out is that most agility instructors go into agility instructing because they enjoy the sport, they enjoy the nuances of handling and training, maybe teaching obstacles. Very rarely will they go into becoming an instructor to deal with what most people would consider general dog training issues, right? Dogs have behavioral problems, right? And so you may have that dog. You may have classmates who have that dog, right? The dog who has behavioral issues, and it's very frustrating for you or for your friend. Or if you're an instructor and you're listening, a student, and you don't know where to go and get guidance. So this is why we try and have people like Denise on the podcast, because I think it very much touches agility. And the more I realize this, the better that my agility dogs got, right? With each generation, the training got better. The dogs run faster. They run with more confidence, and they just have a better overall experience. So Denise, what do you have over at at your academy right now? Do you have courses that are ongoing right now for the fall? Or are they about to start? Where are you in your season?
At this point, we offer about 40 classes every 2 months, and they always start on the 1st. So the next set will start on December 1st.
Oh, perfect.
We offer, 12 webinars now a month, and they cover everything. We offer 10 PPP workshops. Workshops are 1 week long, kind of mini classes. We offer, and I think we offer about 100 things a month in total. So there's so many educational opportunities. If somebody is struggling, the best thing they can do is send me a note. And I'm happy to help. The easy way to do that is through Facebook Messenger, or I'm not hard to find. Email is fine. Send me a note. Tell me what you're going through, and I will do my best. The thing you need to know is that there's almost never going to be a class that exactly matches your exact issue. But what there is a lot of educational opportunity. FTSA is not the only place to learn. There are so many really good places now. And I hope agility instructors, obedience instructors, all of these people learn how to say, I don't know how to help you with that problem. And there are resources that maybe will help you better. There's no shame in not knowing. The problem is trying to help someone with a problem when you have no idea what you're doing. Go ahead and just say, look, my specialty is agility or obedience or IPO. Your problem is weird and different. I don't know how to help you. And have a database of organizations and instructors that you can send to. If you come to me and you tell me your problem, I will tell you if I don't think we have what you need. I'm very open about that. And I personally can't solve all your problems. Most of the time what's going to happen is As I'm reading through something someone sends me, there will actually be way more issues in there than they're aware of. And I can kind of mentally count through, you didn't remove the cookies, you're luring your dog has fear issues, you continued to trial. Like, I'm mentally calculating them all. One class isn't going to do it. So you're going to need a lot of things. And if you settle in and just keep evaluating every month, say, is my dog getting better? Then you're on the right track. Thank goodness for all of the opportunities we have. Really, it's not the world it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
10 years ago, when I had private lessons, I had to solve everyone's problem. I didn't have anywhere to go. And I did a whole lot of faking it, right? Sometimes it worked, sometimes not. But I did my best. Now, I would be so much quicker to say, wow, noise sensitivity. I'm going to have you talk to Amy Cook. That is her thing. She gets that. That's not my area. I only understand what other people have told me, what I've read, and what I've seen online. I want to help you with things that I know. In my heart, I know I have seen hundreds of dogs with this issue. I know this stuff. I can add value. Let's use the resources we have out there. And if your love is training and not behavior, find a behavior person in your area to refer to. Make some friends. This is a good thing. This is great for your business. Make friends. How much happier your class would be if the dog's behavior improved, right? I mean, if your love is training agility and there are 4 dogs who are progressing in the class and 1 that's making everyone miserable, wouldn't your life be better if you were able to find help for that dog? Don't take the responsibility on. Just say, I don't feel qualified to help. It's absolutely the best way to use the amazing resources that we have now. We have experts, so use them.
Yeah, that is such good advice. As you were saying that, it occurred to me that I think a lot of times as students, we also expect our instructors to really be able to tackle any problem. And it's crazy to think that we would, for doctors who, go through medical school and residency and specialist training, we would never go to one particular doctor and expect them to be able to treat anything that ailed us. We are very comfortable. In fact, we prefer to go to our specialists to get that information. And I think you're absolutely right. There is specialization in dog training. There's specialization in agility, specific skills like running contacts, things like this, and the ability to refer out as an instructor is invaluable. And the ability to be open to that as a student will really help you fix your problems faster.
Yeah. And also the ability to say I was wrong is a big deal. I've been training dogs for 40 years, so it's been a long time. And I've always thought I was right, because I'm a self-confident person, right? So when I was 10 years old, I was right then. I was right when I was 15. I was right when I was 20. I'm still right. I am right now today. The problem or the change is I can look back 5 years and I can say I was wrong. So what that tells me is today I'm saying things and I'm wrong. I just don't know I'm wrong. But the recognition that we are constantly changing and evolving with what I think is right, obviously I wouldn't have said it if I didn't think so. That way of thinking, looking out and being open, both as an instructor, as a student, to tell your students, you know what? I was wrong. I don't like the way this is working for your dog. This is not something to be ashamed of. It's actually something to be proud of. I was wrong about how I approached this. I was wrong about the behavior. I sent you to the wrong person for help. And for the student to be able to say, wow, how fortunate I am to be working with a person who can admit it rather than insisting and pounding down the wrong path. We just need to constantly be open and evolving and listening. And then you're going to solve a whole lot more problems. Plus, you know what? You might come up with something cool, right? Just something cool and different. Because if you can admit you're wrong, you can also admit that you're about to embark on an experiment. And if you're willing to embark on an experiment with everybody knowing it, I've said to students, I have no idea if this is going to work, but I have run out of ideas. So let's try it. Are you okay with that? And they always say, yeah, because they don't know what else to do. Half the time it makes it worse. Better stop. Half the time makes it better. We're all a little smarter. Like we've learned no matter what.
Right.
And I'd love to see that. But a big part, admit what you know, admit what you don't know, and know that whatever you think today, half of it will be wrong. You just don't know it yet. You'll find out. And if we think that way, we'll be better trainers.
Absolutely. Fantastic advice, I think, in dog training and in life.
Mm-hmm.
We bring deep thoughts here on the podcast.
Excellent.
All right. Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We will have links to our previous podcast with you, to the article that spawned this particular episode, to the Fenzi Dog Sports Academy, and all of the great resources that you have there. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, hititboard.com and onetdc.com. Happy training.